The year was 1976. Inside a quiet suburban home in Los Altos, California, three young men stood over a wooden workbench covered in wires, chips, and possibility. Those three young men were 21-year-old Steve Jobs, 25-year-old Steve Wozniak, and 41-year-old Ronald Wayne. They had no funding, no corporate structure, and no guarantee that any of this would work. But they had a belief that sounded almost absurd for its time: that computers should belong to ordinary people. In the 1970s, computers were not personal. They were locked inside universities, government labs, and giant corporations. They were machines you submitted requests to, not tools you lived with. What Apple was building was not just a product, it was a shift in power. Because nearly 5 decades later, the company born in that garage would become the first publicly traded company in history to reach $3 trillion market value. And it did not get there by selling the most devices. It got there by reshaping the relationship between humans and technology. The first product of the venture was Apple I. It was a hand-built single-circuit board sold for $666.66. Around 200 units were made. It was never meant to be a mass product, but the Apple II was different. Launched in 1977, it arrived as one of the first fully assembled personal computers, a machine that worked straight out of the box. No soldering, no engineering knowledge, just plug it in and begin. It was revolutionary. Sales surged from thousands to millions. Apple became one of the fastest growing companies in America. Then in December 1980, Apple went public. The valuation? Well, it was $1.8 billion. On the first day of trading, more than 300 employees became millionaires. It was the biggest IPO since Ford in 1956. Apple wasn't just successful. Apple was the future. Success brought expectations, and expectations created pressure. In the year 1983, Apple decided to hire PepsiCo president John Sculley as chief executive officer. Steve Jobs convinced him with a single line: "Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life, or come with me and change the world?" But inside Apple, tensions grew. The Macintosh, revolutionary in design, was struggling in sales. The board wanted stability, but Jobs wanted control. In the year 1985, after a brutal internal power struggle, the board decided to side with Sculley, and Steve Jobs decided to resign. The co-founder of Apple was out of the company, and what followed was a decade of confusion. Dozens of product variations without any clear direction. Meanwhile, Microsoft licensed Windows to every PC manufacturer on earth. The market shifted. Apple's share collapsed into single digits. By the year 1997, the company was losing $1 billion a year and had 90 days of cash left. Apple, the company that defined personal computing, was on the verge of disappearing. The rescue came from a company Apple had once ignored, Next, founded by Steve Jobs after he left Apple. In the year 1997, Apple bought Next for $429 million, and with it, Steve Jobs returned. His first decision was ruthless. He walked into a room filled with Apple's product teams and asked one simple question: which of these are truly great? Almost everything was cancelled. Nearly 70% of Apple's products vanished. In their place came a simple grid: consumer and professional, desktop and portable. 4 products. That was the entire company's future. Then in the year 1998 came the iMac. Bright, transparent, simple. It didn't look like a computer. It looked like something from another era. It sold 800,000 units in just 5 months and returned Apple to profitability. But more importantly, it restored Apple's identity. Apple was no longer competing on specifications. It was competing on experience. In 2001, Apple introduced a simple white device with a mechanical wheel. 1,000 songs in your pocket. The iPod wasn't the first MP3 player. It wasn't even close, but it worked perfectly with iTunes. Buy a song, click sync, done. No complexity. By 2007, Apple had sold over 100 million iPods. But the real strategy wasn't music, it was an ecosystem. Your music library lived inside Apple's software. Your habits lived inside Apple's platform. Switching meant starting over. And for the first time, Apple wasn't just selling products, it was building an environment. On January 9, 2007, Steve Jobs walked onto the stage and said, "Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone." He introduced a touchscreen device that eliminated physical keyboards, styluses, and complexity. A phone, an iPod, and an internet communicator, all in one. The iPhone didn't just disrupt the mobile industry, it erased it. In 2008, Apple launched the App Store. Developers built businesses on Apple's platform. Apple took up to 30% of every transaction. This changed the company forever. Apple was no longer earning money only when it sold hardware. It was now earning money every day people used their devices. By the year 2018, Apple had sold its 2 billionth iPhone. The smartphone had become the center of the modern life, and Apple owned the center. While the world focuses on product launches, Tim Cook was redesigning Apple's operations. Inventory was reduced from months to days. Manufacturing was logged in years in advance. Apple prepaid billions for critical components, ensuring competitors could not get them. When an iPhone launched, millions were available instantly across the world. At the same time, Apple opened its retail stores. Glass walls, minimalist interiors, products you could touch and explore. They became the most profitable retail spaces on earth per square foot. Customers didn't just buy devices, they joined a brand. As Apple's profits exploded, it began returning massive amounts of cash to shareholders through stock buybacks and dividends. At the same time, services became a second pillar. App Store, Apple Music, iCloud, Apple Pay, and Apple TV Plus. By the early 2020s, services generated over $80 billion annually. Recurring revenue, high margins, and predictability. Investors rewarded that stability. In 2018, Apple reached a $1 trillion valuation. In 2020, it reached $2 trillion. By the end of 2022, it reached $3 trillion. No company had ever moved that fast. After the unfortunate demise of Steve Jobs in 2011, many believed Apple's innovation era was over. Instead, under Tim Cook, Apple scaled to levels Jobs never reached. The Apple Watch became the world's most popular watch. AirPods dominated wireless audio. In 2020, Apple introduced the M1 chip. This ended its dependence on Intel. Now Apple controlled hardware, software, and silicon. Everything. Today, more than 2 billion active devices operate inside Apple's ecosystem. That is not a product line. That is a digital nation. Apple became the richest company in the world not because it sold the most technology, but because it created the most complete experience. From a garage in Los Altos to a $3 trillion empire, its strategy was built on simplicity. Remove friction, remove complexity, remove everything that doesn't matter. Until technology stops feeling like a machine and starts feeling like a natural extension of your life. And when billions of people depend on what you build every single day, your value is no longer measured only in dollars. It is measured in influence. And that is how Apple built gravity. And once you have gravity, the world begins to orbit around you. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, do not forget to subscribe.